You're listening to Let's Talk Creation, the science podcast that's just for you, with Paul Gardner and Todd Wood.
Since you worked on dinosaurs,
Yeah.
Dinosaurs in the Bible, where do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? How do we, why, how do they even exist? What should we Bible believers think about dinosaurs?
Well, from a scientific point of view, I think it's pretty clear that they existed because we find their fossil remains, and we don't think that God is deceptive in the sense that he kind of planted bones in the ground just to deceive us.
Right.
So I think dinosaurs are real. They really existed. How do they kind of fit into the overall scheme of biblical history? Well, I guess first of all we need to think about what that big overview of Earth history according to the Bible is. So, Genesis tells us that in the beginning God made everything in 6 ordinary days. The flying creatures and the sea creatures were made on day 5, and the land animals and the first people were made on day 6. We read about Adam's fall into sin, which brought death and corruption into God's good creation. That violence and corruption eventually led to this sort of spiral downwards that resulted in the worldwide flood in the days of Noah. Noah was commanded by God to build an ark to preserve life, and then after the flood, the land animals and the flying creatures that were preserved on the ark repopulated the world from the landing place of the ark. So there's a kind of 20,000 mile overview of those early chapters of Genesis, the early history of the world. So what about the dinosaurs? Where do they kind of fit into that? Well, most of the dinosaurs were terrestrial animals. They were land animals, right? So, a few may have been flyers, a few may have been sort of semi-aquatic, but mostly they were terrestrial animals. They were land animals. So we can infer from what the Bible says, even though dinosaurs are not specifically mentioned in Genesis chapter 1, we can infer that they were created on the 6th day. And that means, of course, that they did live contemporaneously at the same time as the first people, Adam and Eve. So the dinosaurs lived alongside those people. Did they live in the same place? That's an interesting question. Maybe we come back to that.
So you don't think it's like the Flintstones?
Well, I think there are reasons to think that maybe the dinosaurs were living in some other place on the pre-flood Earth. And perhaps, were not there in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve.
Okay.
But I think that's an inference from the fossil record. So we can, we may be able to come back to that.
But the Bible doesn't clearly say whether humans lived with dinosaurs.
No.
Right.
I think you can infer that they lived at the same time, but it doesn't tell us that they lived in the same place.
Sure. Okay.
On the surface of the Earth. So they were living at the same time. Now, when we come to the account of the flood, Noah is commanded to take the animals onto the ark by 2s, the clean animals by 7s. And as far as I can see, there are no exceptions. So if the dinosaurs are terrestrial animals, again, I can infer from the Bible that they would have been included. They were animals that were preserved according to their kinds on the ark. The dinosaurs that were outside the ark, like other animals that were outside the ark, other terrestrial air-breathing land animals, perished. And I think that's where the fossil record of the dinosaurs can be accounted for in a creationist model. We see evidence of their rapid and catastrophic burial. I think those are animals that perished during the flood. Now, at the end of the flood, the animals come off the ark and begin to repopulate the world. And dinosaurs presumably did the same. I think we can infer that the dinosaurs probably didn't survive very long in the post-flood world, because we don't find their fossils showing up in post-flood sediments, in post-flood rocks. So it looks as though they became extinct after the flood, and probably quite soon after the flood. We have to remember that extinction is a reality in a fallen world, and in a world that's been devastated by the flood. Animal kinds have become extinct since the time of the flood and continue to become extinct even today. And I think dinosaurs were one of those ultimate casualties. And again, we may be able to discuss why. Why did the dinosaurs, particularly why did they die out after the flood? So that's kind of the broad overview of where I think this kind of all fits. Now, just coming back to that question, did they live in the same place as the people before the flood? One of the things we find when we look at the flood sediments that contain the fossils of animals and plants that perished during the flood and were buried during the flood, they appear to have been buried as whole communities. So when you look at the rocks that contain dinosaur fossils, there is a whole community of animals, not only dinosaurs, but other kinds of reptiles and even some weird kinds of mammals. And there was a plant community. And I think one of the things that that we can infer from that, and from the absence of certain other kinds of fossils from those same rocks, is that the pre-flood world was divided up into ecological zones or biomes, and that there were dinosaur biomes that were separate from the kind of biomes where humans and most mammals and birds were living. So I think they were living in different places, and that's why they didn't get buried together during the flood. They're living in different biomes.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Let's Talk Creation. If you have questions, send them to podcast@coresci.org. That's podcast@coresci.org. And be sure to let your friends know about Let's Talk Creation. And check us out on social media. Thank you.